Next session to start. I'm so excited about this next lesson this morning. Tim Lewis did such a great job as he talked about some of the things that cause us to doubt. Well, what Dr. Dave Miller is going to do this morning is partially take care of some of that doubt because he has so much incredible evidence that proves that God is working in our lives that's just going to be amazing. Dr. Miller is a graduate of Lubbock Christian University where he earned a BA degree in Bible. He earned his MA degree in speech communication from Texas Tech University and his MDiv as well as his MER from the Harding School of Theology. He is also a graduate of Southern Illinois University where he earned his PhD in rhetoric and public address. For over 40 years, he has served in various capacities of the Churches of Christ, including a pulpit preacher, director of a school of preaching, and host of a nationally televised program which airs on GBN. Presently, he is serving as the executive director of Apologetics Press. Dr. Miller has authored numerous articles and books, including The Qumran Unveiled, Sexual Anarchy, Piloting the Straight, The Silencing of God, Christ and the Continental Congress, Why People Suffer, as well as a series of books that teach children how to read. He conducts over 40 plus speaking engagements a year, including weekend seminars, lectureships, and gospel meetings. We're so blessed to have Dr. Miller with us this morning to talk to us about the teleological argument. I know that you'll be greatly impressed as well as your faith increased. Dr. Miller.
Great delight to be here. So impressive, this group of people coming together for this kind of a lectureship. And I'm honored to be permitted to be here and to be with my fellow speakers. Remember at AP we have a lot of material that deals with the kind of things that we are talking about. In fact, we have a book specifically on this subject of Does God Exist? So you can access all of that at our website. A lot of other things, including the book on suffering. So remember, AP is a nonprofit organization, 40 years old, not out to make money. In fact, all of our guys are supported by churches and individuals, so all the book sales greatly reduced in terms of price, and all that money goes back into producing more material. So we just launched a brand new website that young people, you know, us older folks, when I get used to a website, I don't want them tampering with it and changing it, but they did it. Supposedly to upgrade and make it more for younger people, I guess. And I love younger people, but it was just fine the way it was. So, and we have a lot of other materials too that'll be helpful to you, Lord willing. Now, by the way, I do need to mention one other thing. We had a very generous donor in Texas contact us and say we will match dollar for dollar up to $150K between now and December 22. So if you want to help AP, this would be the time because what you give will be double. All right, enough commercials. What's the Bible teach about this subject? We've had incredible lessons thus far, and I can't wait to hear the others as well. You look around at the world, our young people exposed to this stuff in public school, and they see a question like this. No, you can't know that. That's such an uncertain thing. But no, it's not. Just because we're living in an uncertain world where our country is losing its traditional biblical values doesn't mean that anything's changed in terms of spiritual and moral reality. We're living at a time where our civilization is literally unraveling. And so people are going to be in a state of chaos and confusion and uncertainty. This is a great time to be in the Lord's church and to try to point people to the truth, at least for those who are interested. You know, over the centuries, since the first century, these philosophers and others have come along, theologians, and formulated the classical arguments. And all of these are biblical. It's not like they just pulled them out of the air. And how many people do not know that these arguments, they're decisive. They settle the issue. There's no uncertainty involved. And the one assigned to me is the teleological argument, which comes from a Greek word that means purpose, end, goal. And so the idea is, the teleological argument says that, see, the cosmological argument says, okay, the cosmos are here. Where'd they come from? That's in effect, what's the cause? The teleological argument says, yes, they're here, and look at them. Look at the way they function. There's a mind behind that. There's intent. There's purpose. They didn't just come about and they really don't serve any purpose. There are things going on in the universe that make it clear that this was designed to be orderly, complex, and intricate, and therefore there has to be a designer. There has to be a master architect of the universe. So there's the argument in a nutshell. And notice that when you examine the attributes of the universe and the earth and everything, you conclude not only there must be a mind behind this, but this mind has to be eternal in his nature and being. And he must be infinite in all of his attributes. That's the nature of this God. Think of all the gods that humans have conjured up over the millennia. None of them compare with the portrait of God in the Bible. A perfect, infinite being that possesses all of his attributes to an infinite degree. That's the only cohesive, sensible religion on the planet now. That's all there is to it. How would you like to embrace a religion, as about 1 billion people do, that believes there are thousands of gods? For example, Ganesh. Ganesh is a little pudgy boy that has an elephant head. Now, even if evolution were true, but 1 billion people believe in that, you'll see Ganesh at a Hindu wedding. Well, false religion only exists because of self-idolatry. False religion is self-worship. It enables a person to believe and do what they want to believe and do. But that doesn't mean that there's any rationality to it, or that it's some sort of evidence that proves that that religion is true. Here's the passage that you're using for the theme of this lectureship. There are many teleological affirmations in the Bible, but this is a good one. You're familiar with it, look at it. What can be known about God has been shown to the human race. Not everything about God by any means. He's infinite. But what we need to know, and enough for us to know that he exists and that we are under certain obligations. But notice this terminology, being understood by the things that are made. That says a mouthful. So that's what I'd like for us to do. And you could spend multiple lifetimes and never even begin to examine all the things that have been made, not evolved, made by a maker, which proves and establishes the fact that God exists. Think about just the universe. Again, spend multiple lifetimes examining all the intricacies of the sun, the moon, the stars, the planets, the nebula, and on and on. You can't even begin to do that in your lifetime. Well, then let's just focus on one planet, the Earth. Think of all of the intricacies there. Well, then let's just pick one thing out of Earth. How about the plants? Oh, you don't have time to get through all of that. Okay, one plant. No, you could spend your entire life, as botanists have, and never learn everything about a sunflower. They're that complex, they're that intricate. And then you think about other features of the planet, like the animal life. Think about the human body. What if you say, well, I'm just going to look at the human body? Well, people have spent multiple lives just looking at the human brain, and they still don't understand a great deal about it, but they know it's incredible. Well, think of all of the rest of your body. Notice, it's not like there's evidence out there for atheism and evolution, and there's evidence for God, There is no evidence for atheism or evolution. There's misinterpreted. All the evidence screams God. Now, people may not want to accept that, but it's not because it's not true. It's because they don't want to accept that. And there's been the perennial problem of the human race for 6,000 years. The majority of people do not want God. They do not want to be submissive to Him. That's it. And if you don't think that's true, start in Genesis, in the garden, and move forward. The vast majority of the human race has rejected God. Jesus Himself said, hey, the way to heaven is very narrow, very rigid, very strict, very restrictive. In fact, the King James uses that word straight, S-T-R-A-I-T. Like a straight jacket. Have you ever put on a straight jacket? I don't want to show hands or anything. That's the way God describes the way to get there. It's very restrictive. Oh, but the way to eternal destruction is broad, it's wide, and the vast majority of the human race has gone that direction. Now that's sad, it's negative, it's depressing. You think we're sad about that, think how God feels about it. And yet it's the nature of the case. But it won't be because of lack of proof of spiritual reality. Take, for example, this single bacterial cell. Salmonella, that's a deadly bacteria. This cell body has protruding out of it a number of flagella. That's the plural form of flagellum. That rotate synchronously 200 to 300 cycles per second to generate thrust. Now look here where one of these enters the cell body. Look at the transparent membrane where you can see beneath the surface. This is a motor, an engine that this single filament enters into by first being connected to a helical propeller, a hook which acts exactly like a universal joint in an automobile. Now look at this thing. Let's think if you're a child, 5-year-old child, and somebody shows you a picture of that, and most intelligent 5-year-olds would say, well, surely that took millions of years over a long period of time with humidity and temperature conditions being just right for this to come about with a bunch of trial and error. That would be a child that probably you need to check and see if their temperature is okay. 20 different proteins. This, by the way, this involves self-assembly. What scientists call self-assembly. Bio-nanomachine that has the ability of self-assembly. It grows itself. These flagellum go into this motor, but look how this motor is constructed. A switch complex called a C-ring, and then proteins begin to assert themselves up through the ring in order to grow the flagellum. Such sophistication. All right, the motor's complete. Now look how the flagellum grows. First, the hook, which brings the structure up outside of the cell body, and then these two proteins, which they call HAP1 and HAP2, are attached. And then this little capping protein that they call HAP3 forms a capping structure, which is prepared then to receive the flagellum molecules that begin coming up through this little engine and are inserted successively just below the cap, which shifts itself in order to allow them to come forth and be transported so that it can grow this flagellum and be polymerized at the growing end. Yeah, that just happened, didn't it? Pure accident, mindless chance forces of what? Nature? Nature itself indicates that it's not happenstance. 20 to 30,000 flagella molecules building a 10 to 15 micrometer long filament. All of these capable of generating thrust because they rotate synchronously. Similar to man-made motors, obviously, built on the same principles that come from God. Look at this thing operating. Rotor, stator unit, cell membrane, switching unit, bushing, universal joint. Humans have tried to duplicate some of these things, and they've had some success, but generally speaking, no. They can't do anything like this. Rotating at a speed of up to 20,000 RPMs faster than the speed of Formula One race cars. Energy conversion efficiency close to 100%. Humans can't create anything like this, and they have tried. Protons flow up through the cell body in order to operate this thing. No fuel shortage. Highly efficient flagellar motor, far beyond the capabilities of artificial motors. So sophisticated to suggest that that evolved. That's the height of irrationality and blind prejudice. The cheetah is the fastest creature on the planet. It can move in 1 second 25 of its body lengths. Humans can do that at about 5.4. That means these bacteria move about twice as fast as humans. That's proof for God. Now notice that. We don't have to look at anything else on the planet. Evolution, atheism cannot explain that. Not that they won't attempt to do so, but you'll get the gobbledygook that they spew out in college classrooms all over the planet and have for 50 years, 60 years, that a child might scratch their head and think there's something to it, but there's not. Their explanations are ridiculous, cloaked in a lot of terminology that makes it seem credible. But the human mind that's unbiased looks at something like that and says, okay, someone created that. Proof for the existence of the God of the Bible. You know, over in this part of the country, even here in Idaho, there is this lodgepole pine. A lot of it up in Canada. This particular species of pine produces cones. You know, cones are a grouping of seeds. And so when the cone reaches maturity, typically they would fall out and replant. Not this species. Because there's a resinous bond that holds these seeds within the cone. Well, that sure seems like a mistake of nature. No, do you know what it takes to dissolve that resin and to release the seed? Fire. Okay, so there was a group of lodgepole pines a couple of million years ago. They said, if we don't do something, we are going to be burned out of existence. So let's see if we can create seed that will remain in reserve until a forest fire, which then will release those. You know, nature doesn't have any sentience or intelligence. It's all an effect of a higher mind. Well, think about that then. Millions of seeds held in reserve for many years, literally waiting, so that they can germinate on a seedbed prepared by fire. This is a 1998 picture of the Yellowstone fires, which occurred 10 years earlier. So there they are, completely regrowing the forest. And by the way, no human intervention was necessary. I'm astounded at how much people think that they can save the planet. You know, usually that's in the hotel rooms I go to. There'll be something, little note on the pillow, help save the planet. You know, don't make us come and wash your sheets every day. Well, I don't make them come and wash my sheets every day, but that's not going to save the planet. The planet will be here as long as God intends for it to be because it's serving a specific purpose. And until that purpose is completed, it's going to be here. Humans are so arrogant. Here is a research team that's been studying this rare Southeast Asian species of beetle. What impresses them is its unusual brilliance. It has these little tiny long flat scales that are situated in such a way that they scatter white light far better than anything we've produced in terms of paints and colors. These scales are only 1/200th of a millimeter thick, 10 times thinner than a human hair, far thinner than the coatings and paints that are used on paper and plastics. Man-made coatings would have to be twice as thick to be as white. So they're interested in that. You'd be amazed at how many scientists are spending their time studying God's nature in order to produce things that are more effective and helpful to humanity. But they're plagiarists. And they won't even give him credit. Brilliant scientists hope to mimic the design of the beetle, but notice the beetle didn't attend a university of beetles or study physics or create itself, and yet teaching smart men about optical brilliance. Well, that's how God operates. He places evidence all around people, but doesn't force them to consider it. It's up to them to look at it and stand back in awe of the Creator. Evidence for God. Look how God put this in Genesis 1. God made everything, which includes the things that creep on the earth. And Psalm 148, He commanded they were created, and that included the creeping things. That's who created that beetle. It wasn't mindless evolution or man. What about seed? Seed is proof of God. There's so much of it. Isn't that interesting in Creation Week? He brings this up over and over and over. You know, God doesn't say things mindlessly and repetitiously in order to just, hear himself talk? We better set up and pay attention. Here is decisive proof for God. Think about how God designed the planet. It's so incredibly intricate in terms of all of its connections and everything. Humans have not been able to sort all this out, but it's clear that He intended for seed to be dispersed on the planet. There's at least 3 ways by which that's accomplished. You know, if a bird lands on a fruit tree and begins eating that fruit and then flies off somewhere else and that fruit passes through his body and seeds come out. Or perhaps, there have been things that are on one continent and suddenly they spring up on another continent. Well, they figured out the seed floated over there. And then, of course, wind is a major means of dispersal. Take, for example, a plant that I know is probably your favorite plant, the dandelion. These, if a child would take just one of these into their science classroom and say, I hold in my hand proof of God. There's no other explanation for this. Each one of these dandelions is actually a grouping of seeds. And each of these dandelions are literally aerodynamically designed to function the way they do in terms of dispersal. So if that shaft were too long or too short, it would not fly the way it was designed to fly. How do you explain that? It has this little canopy on top of these little fibers. Each one is attached to a separate seed. Here's a Eurasian dandelion. Absolute, undeniable proof of God. These are like little helicopters. Humans look at nature and then they create these things and people are just amazed. They never go back to see where the idea came from. It came from God. All kinds of seed across this planet function this way. See, again, if you're just too busy, in the big city doing the things you do, you don't stand back. I think it was Thomas Jefferson who said, the first and original profession was farming. And that's how God set it up. And he said, if America ever reaches the point where people begin clustering in big cities and leave the land, you're going to see big problems in our country. He said that. But one of the things about being out around nature is it causes you to be more conscious that this couldn't have all just happened. There has to be a higher power, a higher being. So these are all over the world. How about just the common maple tree seed? It's a little miniature helicopter. It was designed to function that way in order to spread and reseed the tree. And so it has an aerodynamically designed fan-shaped wing with a single seed in order to disperse that seed. Look at these, they call them whirling nuts. They spin. They're designed to spin aerodynamically when they fall from the tree. And this one is absolutely astounding. This is found in the Sunda Islands of the Malay archipelago. It's a single seed. But look what houses it. Look what surrounds it. It looks like a wing or wings. They become airborne when they're released from a gourd and they sail through the air, spiraling downward in 20-foot circles. You want to see what that looks like? High in the forest canopy. So you're walking through the forest. You have no reason to believe anybody's ever been there. And all of a sudden you see these gourds begin dropping out the bottom, these objects that become airborne and begin to fly in clearly intended ways. Again, a child walks through that and sees that. Looks like a paper airplane. No, it's much more sophisticated than our paper airplanes. A true aerodynamically designed glider. And you think that just happened? That screams design. That's how that plant reseeds itself. Now, don't bring kudzu over here to this part of the state, but same sort of thing. God intended for these things to grow. Here are these maple, kids are fascinated by this. They still have a sense of awe at such matters. Pass by one of these trees when they're dropping these. Here's kind of a slow-mo thing where you can see it. There's not two wings there, there's just one. And yet it spins like chopper blades. Here's one of those wing nut fruits. So you would have to argue, if you're an atheist, that just happened. I mean, just for some reason over a long period of time of chance. Chance what? There's no design or creative capability built within the concept of evolution. Amazing. That's divine design. No wonder then Isaiah said, comparing this seed to the Word of God and its dispersal. So shall my word be. Here's the ponderosa pine. I grew up in Phoenix, Arizona, and went up to the Mogollon Rim that Zane Grey wrote about. Who knows who Zane Grey was? That's not the author of today, is it? Yeah, but you're older like me. The ponderosa pine grows up on that rim. That's supposed to be like the third freshest air in the world. Did you know that? It has this odd-looking bark. In fact, the bark looks like a jigsaw puzzle. Well, what's going on there? Why do you have these big plates that cover the surface of this tree? Well, if the tree catches fire, these plates pop off as the bark burns. So it literally sheds its burning bark. Consequently, it can handle low-intensity forest fires and perpetuate its existence. Again, there surely was a meeting of the ponderosa pines on one occasion in order for them to figure out how to avoid extinction. Creative design. How about the fact that we have been told, the government can tell you what to do. Even tell you to cover your face. Well, they told us, the agriculture department told us many years ago that you need to stop using wood, ladies. Don't have wood cutting boards. Don't use wood utensils, spoons, and the like because they can harbor bacteria. So you need to go to man-made products like plastic. Well, guess what? The best research, not true. Not true. I contacted Dr. Cliver a number of years ago now. He was working out at UC Davis. He was working with the Food Safety Laboratory, World Health Organization, Center for Food Virology. And he spent a lot of time looking at this. And he concluded, as far as I know, he was not a Christian, probably an atheist. But he followed the science. See, science proves God, not evolution. And he concluded that wood possesses what he called antibacterial properties. He took 5 life-threatening bacteria, E. coli, I mentioned Salmonella, staph, and he inoculated 10 species of hardwood and then 4 plastic polymers. And within 3 minutes of inoculating the wooden boards with cultures of these food poisoning agents, he said 99.9% of that bacteria, and this was his term, became unrecoverable. Unrecoverable. Whereas the bacteria on the plastic did not die, and in fact left on these items overnight. Microbial growth on the plastic boards occurred, but by morning there was no recoverable bacteria on the wood. And he has since died just in the last couple of years. I don't know that he ever concluded what's going on here, other than the fact that he thought the wood had some sort of antibacterial property. He concluded that the wood, the fibers were absorbing the bacteria, pulling it down into the fibers where they really never return. Whereas the knife scars on the plastic boards are full of bacteria even after a hot water and soap scrubbing. They continued to be able to surface and contaminate food. And therefore, if you take the wood and put varnish or polyurethane or something on it, you are retarding the wood's capability to deal with the bacteria. They remain mystified, these microbiologists, as to what's going on here. What is taking place that this wood is able to do that? Well, what's taking place is God created it to function that way. Isn't it interesting, under the law of Moses, God told the Israelites, any of the pottery and stuff that you make and use in your kitchens and so forth, if you subject that to some sort of a discharge, then you don't want to use that again. Just break it and start over, make you another pot. But your wood bowls, you can just rinse those out and they're good to go. Let's talk for a moment about symbiotic design. This is, again, notice each one of these is sufficient proof of God. Symbiosis is the idea of an association between plants and animals, either two plants, two animals, plants and animals. It becomes very sophisticated, intricate. And this relationship is obligatory generally. There are different levels of this, but generally obligatory. That is, each one needs the other in order to survive. And if they don't have the other one, they don't survive. Therefore, they are each providing a service for the other, each benefits from the other. This is proof of God. But by the way, it's not only proof of God, it's proof of the 6 days of creation in Genesis 1. We'll talk about that later. If you were to go to the tip of Africa and go east, you would come beneath the island of Madagascar to this little island of Mauritius. This was the only known home of the dodo bird, which went extinct some time ago. You and I, therefore, will never see in person a dodo bird. I'm sure that the animal rights people gather on a regular occasion and mourn his passing. God's creatures are absolutely incredible, but they're not humans. Remember how Jesus put that in Matthew 10? Are you not much more valuable than they? Don't ever put animals in a category with humans. That's sacrilegious, it's idolatrous, even though animals provide many services that God intended. Well, this bird was first sighted by European travelers around 1600, and within 80 years it had gone extinct. Once again, evil man destroying the planet. You know how many species of plants and animals have gone out of existence without any impact by humans? It's how God set up the created order. Now, also on this island, there's this incredible tree, the Tambalic oak tree. In 1973, it was discovered by the local Mauritian lumber people that it was going extinct. In fact, by that point, only 13 of the trees remained, and they were sickly. And they stepped in and tried to reproduce the tree in order to keep this very valuable timber from becoming unavailable. And the ones that remained, they thought were 3 centuries old. I mean, they were very old, and they were the ones that were left. And they would take the seeds and they would put them under nursery conditions and germinate them and so forth, but they just could not get this tree to reproduce. And so they turned to an American wildlife ecologist who I spoke with again personally. He was located at the University of Wisconsin, Stanley Temple, and an article came out back in '77 in Science magazine in which he describes this event. And so if you were to get this off the internet, he calls this mutualism, another definition for another term used to refer to symbiosis, symbiotic relationships. He examined the situation and postulated, he hypothesized that based upon the age of these trees, something must have changed in the environment 300 years earlier that caused this tree to go on the road to extinction. Well, the dodo bird went extinct about that time. And so he speculated that something must have happened there. He went back and looked at the records that were left, not many records left of the dodo bird, but some of the early explorers described dodo behavior as involving a diet of fruit and seed. And Dr. Temple knew that a seed can sometimes be affected by plants, animals, or other animals, and by insects and the like. Well, this particular seed from this particular tree is very similar to an avocado. It has a pulpy, succulent mesocarp and then a thin exocarp about 2 inches in diameter. And Temple knew, being a wildlife ecologist, that sometimes there's an interaction and seeds have to be processed within an animal's innards in order to prepare it for growth and sprouting. The grinding of a big bird's gizzard can erode just the right amount so that the seed then becomes viable and is able to take root in the soil. Well, how's Dr. Temple going to test this hypothesis? Because all the dodo birds are gone, so he decides to select a bird that is known as being dumb as a dodo, and so he enlisted a flock of turkeys. And he had them eat these seeds, and some of them made it through, and they had been ground down by the gizzards, and they then in turn sprouted in order to produce perhaps the first Tamblecoke tree seen on the island in 300 years. What a relationship. So the dodo bird received sustenance by eating the seeds and the leaves of the tree. The tree was perpetuated by the bird's gizzard scratching its seeds as they passed through its digestive system. By the way, that proves that birds and plants had to come into existence close in time to each other, which means one couldn't have been created by God on, say, day 5, and millions of years go by before it receives what it needs in order to perpetuate itself. That's proof of God, proof of the inspiration of the Bible. Here's the Nile croc. Largest crocodilian primordial brute, can reach 20 feet and weigh up to 1,650 pounds. It'll eat anything. It'll attack zebras, full-grown zebras, hippos, birds, porcupines, and even other crocs. They're ambush hunters. You remember not too many years ago, that family down in Florida, I think they were at Disney World, weren't they? And a croc came out, grabbed that chime. I mean, they just sit there and wait, and then they're on you. A vicious man-eater. In fact, every year, up to 200 people die in the jaws of a Nile croc. Now look at this little creature. This is known as the plover bird, the Egyptian plover bird. This little bird, in fact, I came across this book that was written by a World War I British intelligence officer who was kind of an armchair ornithologist in his spare time. He wrote a book in 1959 called The Piratical and Predatory Habits of Birds. And he describes in there in great detail about the behavior of this bird. He was north of Khartoum and watched a large crocodile emerge from the river to a sandbank, flop down on its belly, close its eyes, and open its jaws. 3 of these pluvianus is the technical name for the bird, who had been feeding nearby at once flew to it, one perched on the outer gums, pecking at the teeth, the other 2 remaining on the ground and inspecting the mouth, occasionally reaching up and pecking the teeth. He said, I could not say what was extracted by the birds, but the whole episode looked as though the crocodile expected and invited the birds. And the birds were quite at home inspecting the inside of the mouth of the crocodile. Well, what's going on here is that these birds are pecking around the teeth and removing parasites, leeches, and bits of food that infest the crocodile's mouth. I found this 1893 issue of the Ibis, which is the quarterly journal of ornithology. Here was a letter to the editor in which this fellow described going to the Nile with other members of his family. And he and his brother-in-law spent several hours watching the crocs and the crocodile birds, he called them. And they did this for a lengthy period of time. They dug out a little pit and kind of positioned themselves there where they could watch from a distance what was taking place, and waited there patiently until the crocs came out of the water and sat down, laid down on the bank. We watched patiently until about noon when 2 large crocs came out of the water on the bank and apparently were soon asleep. Looked like they were going to sleep. Several crocodile birds commenced flitting over them, and through our field glasses we watched one bird, saw it deliberately go up to a crocodile, apparently asleep, but it opened its jaws. In what appeared to be a very short time, probably not more than a minute or 2, the crocodile opened its jaws and we saw the crocodile bird go down to the waters. So notice he closes it back, the bird's inside, opens up, the bird comes out, goes down to the water riverside. As the sandbank was, I should say, at least half a mile across, the bird's back was turned towards us. We could not see whether it vomited in the water or drank, but in the course of a few seconds it returned to the crocodile, which opened its mouth again, and the bird again entered. The mouth was closed and in a short time was opened again for the bird to come out, and the same operation was repeated at the riverbank. We saw the same bird enter the crocodile's mouth 3 times and on 3 occasions run to the water in order to do whatever he was doing. Well, that was one of God's dentists. God built into the created order means of caring for other animals. And so the plover gets a meal, the croc gets valuable teeth cleaning, both benefit. How in the world could that have evolved? It could not have evolved. That relationship had to have been set into place by the Creator at the beginning. No time for millions of years of trial and error for them to get together and figure out how to help each other. It had to have been set into place from the very beginning. That proves pre-planning, that proves teleology, intention on the part of the master designer and creator. No crocodile could have gradually decided it was in its best interest to let a bird clean its mouth. Now, that just didn't happen. Although that's more believable than evolution. Look at what Job said. Now ask the beasts. They'll teach you, and the birds of the air, they will tell you. Who among all these does not know that the hand of the Lord has done this? In whose hand the life of every living thing and the breath of all of us. Astounding. Sir James Jeans was an English physicist, astronomer, mathematician, professor at Cambridge and Princeton, earned the gold medal of the Royal Astronomical Society, knighted by the Queen in 1928, and in fact there is a crater on the moon that's named after him. Again, I'm not aware that he was religious in his thinking, but look at the statement he made in his book, The Mysterious Universe. We discover that the universe shows evidence of a designing or controlling power that has something in common with our own individual minds, not so far as we've discovered emotion, morality, or aesthetic appreciation, but the tendency to think in the way which, for want of a better word, we describe as mathematical. Yeah, we were created in the image of God. And so we share attributes of deity. Notice all of these objects along with billions of others. No sentience, no intelligence, no consciousness, no creative capability. Their complex, intricate, rational, purposive, marvelous design demands an all-powerful, all-knowing, infinite God, the God of the Bible. So Romans chapter 1 is saying it well. And anybody that looks around at the things that are made and concludes, oh, there's no God, well, they're without excuse. That's irrational. Psalm 104, O Lord, how manifold are your works. In wisdom you've made them all. The earth is full of your creatures. Here's the sea, great and wide, which teems with creatures. By the way, this passage mentions Leviathan. And not an imaginary creature, nor is it a crocodile. This was a fire-breathing animal, like all the other inhabitants of the sea, created by God himself. Stand still and consider the wondrous works of God. So the smaller and deeper we go, evolution would say, the more simple it gets. No. It's complex all the way down. Complex, sophisticated, and absolutely astounding. And one must brush aside the overwhelming evidence of him in creation. No wonder twice the psalmist said, you're foolish in your thinking. The word fool in the ancient language is not referring to a person that's mentally defective or something. It's talking about moral deficiency. You've decided within your heart and your mind and your spirit that you're going to reject what is obviously the case. That's foolish. And anybody that concludes there is no God, that's their condition. Asking us to believe that evolution is true is like asking us to believe that if we threw a stick of dynamite into a print shop, maybe did this multiple times over a long period of time, the resulting explosion, once all the debris settles, we should expect at some point to run across a 5th edition Webster's Dictionary, because all of the components are there. It's just a matter of time and chance and the proper humidity and the like. Such intricacy, complexity, and sophistication is proof of a divine origin. So we can know that God exists. O Lord, how manifold are your works. In wisdom you have made them all. The earth is full of your creatures. May we humbly bow before, what should this do? Man, it ought to humble us and cause us, I want to live my life for that God. I want to be conscious of what he expects from me every day. Well, all this material is available on our website. You can gain access to it if you will go to our site and find out how to do that. Thank you for your kind attention. Tomorrow, I'm going to show you more of this. Now, don't go out of here and tell people, what we did at church? We talked about a dodo bird. Well, just remember Romans 1. You can know there's a God by the things that are made.